Hello and a warm welcome to another session of the CGMA Management Accounting Series. I'm Gugulethu Cele. Now, as we start the series of looking at the CGMA report on business analytics and decision making, the human dimension, the range of data available to businesses these days continues to expand. Now, this report outlines how best practice in decision making is shifting towards an insight-driven process based on the rational interpretation and understanding of data. Joining us to discuss the best way of unlocking the opportunities that big data brings with it, I have joining me a panel of experts, commencing with Beth McGuinness, who's Associate Partner at IQ Business, Lee Naik, Managing Director of Accenture Digital South Africa, Johan Pretorius, Business Intelligence Lead at MTN, Philip Hatting, who's the Partner leading data and analytics for PwC Sub-Saharan Africa, and Verna Swanepoel, Director and Business Area Leader for Deloitte Analytics Africa. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for joining us. Not to forget that we have a wonderful audience as well, made up of industry experts in their own right and participants through CIMA, who will also be engaging with us through a question and answer session. Well, let's commence with the conversation, and a lot of it really is based on data and, of course, the interpretation and analysis of this information using the human element. But let's start off with the D word, which is the data, and how critical this has actually become in today's day and age. As we know, there are organizations popularly known as the FANG stocks, Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Netflix, who have made a business of establishing data and putting it at the center of it all. Beth, let's start off with you with regard to the landscape and importance and critical role that data faces now.
So I think if we look back even as far as 10 years ago, we had companies were completely reliant on their own internal data sources. Whereas now, as people become more and more willing to share of themselves personally, or information is collected about individuals as they move through the world, there are much broader aspects of data that can be brought into the decision making spectrum that are starting to influence the level and the quality of decisions that a company can make, not only about how should they manage their own business, but what are their customers expecting them to do, and how can they interrelate with those customers in a better way.
Lee, probably an unfair question. Is it the amount of data that adds to the competitiveness of an organization, or how it's actually analyzed and interpreted?
Well, very simply, it's how it's used. There's almost a quintillion amount of data being produced every day, and that's lots and lots of zeros. So the point is, in a world that has both structured data and unstructured data, what kind of questions can we answer as organizations to drive our very survival? So very clearly, it's how we do it and not the amounts of data.
Philip, I'd like to get your perspective on this. Given that you do have a focus on Sub-Saharan Africa in particular, are there particular nuances, though, despite the fact that Sub-Saharan Africa is painted with one brush, but elements that help you identify the differences and particular elements that differentiate particular segments in the market?
I think if you look across Africa, the need is the same. It's all about creating insight, the value from insight. So when we look across all the clients that we currently serve, the questions are more or less the same. So how can they start generating more value out of those data sets? It's obviously the first critical part is that you need to start with the data first before you can get there. So it's all of part, joining that journey with them. That is very important.
Verna, I'd like to come to you here to get your perspective, and Johan, feel free to jump in too. But as you say, it's the data that stores all this information and plays a critical element here. But do we need to go 2 steps back, perhaps, in understanding how management accountants and individuals in organizations actually collect and collate this data?
Yes, absolutely. I think a lot of the challenge that organizations are finding today is firstly that they don't understand where the data comes from. They don't necessarily realize that ultimately there's a business process that generates the data. And even going a step further back, there's people involved. So it's not just about the technology of collecting the data. It's actually going all the way back and understanding the organizational dynamics around the business processes, the technologies we employ, and the people that ultimately run these processes, generating the data, and then moving to asking the question around how do we collect the data from a technology perspective, putting it into some sort of a central place where it becomes accessible, and adding the context to the data so that the management accountant or whoever the individual might be that wants to interrogate and interpret the data understands where it came from, what happened to it along the journey, and ultimately the context within which I look at the data.
Johan, would you agree?
Yes, no, I certainly agree. I think the main thing also is around a common data framework, so that everyone's got a common understanding of that data is an asset and it should be treated as such.
Is that the status quo at the moment, though, in various industries?
I think it is becoming the status quo because the amount of information being generated through businesses, it supplies them an edge over their competitors if they treat the data properly, if they can harness the insights that they derive from the data.
Mm-hmm. Let's get then to the important element. We've painted a picture of perhaps how things do fare at the moment, but moving forward is the human dimension, which is the crux of the conversation that we're having today. Philip, if I can come to you to take a look again perhaps at the status quo, are we paying enough attention to the human element when it comes to analyzing the data and information that's available, and where are we lacking? An open question as well to the panel.
I think it's a critical point to look at. Obviously data and the insights are going to trigger some sort of decision-making process, and that's always where data insight actually comes to manual part of it, where that actually interfaces. So it is quite critical to have a look at how decisions are being made and how it's actually being informed in terms of the data. We've recently conducted a survey and big decision on how that's actually been done, and it's very clear from that perspective that there's overriding manual decisions still being made. But I think technology, process, all of those things deliver the insights, but it's the human element that ultimately brings the uniqueness, the judgment, all of those different things to it, which is quite critical to differentiate and to create new, like for instance, influence business models, operating models, and so on for clients.
Mm-hmm. Lee, you wanted to add there, or Beth?
I think what becomes very important on the human side of it is, can people trust the data that you're putting in front of them? I think if you show them information that is completely against what their gut instinct is telling them should be the case within their business, you're going to have a situation where they don't believe the information. They will assume a mistake has been made in the way that it's been analysed, how it's been presented, some level of interpretation that's been applied. So really it requires your business people that are using that information to have absolute faith in the people that are gathering the information, to know where it's being sourced from, and to trust the processes that are responsible for managing it and making it available to them.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to add that, when you think about the people and what people can do, it's clear that we are much smarter than robots and software. The question is why we keep doing tasks that software could do for us. So part of the question I have, and it's very simple, is that we are doing the wrong things. Why aren't we using technology to help us industrialize how we collate and get the quality right, and spend the brain power we have on solving the outcomes that organizations need? Ultimately, what we don't want is more and more paper and more data sets. We actually want more outcomes that are very focused to the organization we're serving or the government we're serving. If we can drive value for citizens and consumers, that's where the game is at. So part of the question about what should management accountants do, fundamentally something completely different. Use the technology and become best friends with it. Work hand in glove with technology as opposed to competing with it. And when you start to use technology for what it does really well, which is not take tea breaks, work 24/7, you can use a limited human power for what we do very well, which is think about the outcomes that Philip alluded to.
How do we get to that mindset though? Go ahead, Philip, you wanted to add?
So I just wanted to add to that. I think it's going to be less about how you collect the data, but actually how much more time you start spending about making the decisions. So there's definitely a shift more towards management accounts and reporting that needs to start generating more of those insights that's going to trigger certain actions that is going to create value for the organization. So it's 100%, it's all about less collecting the data and more about interpreting and generating some actions from there, which is quite critical, where the management accountant actually plays quite a critical role.
What's interesting though, Lee, and you mentioned that we should be using machines to do these menial tasks. And I certainly find on a daily basis almost that organizations have a fundamental challenge. They complain about the fact that some of their most expensive and most intelligent individuals spend the majority of their time doing these manual activities, collecting data, cleansing the data, massaging the data, and that they're not really spending their time on the insights, which is what most of them actually were employed for. And I guess one of the key challenges that one needs to explore a bit is, why is that the case? So clearly the technologies are there. We know the technologies are available, we know they work. What is leading to the non-adoption of those capabilities? Is it possibly a fear factor? Is it maybe that there's a new skill set that's required and the lack of that skill leads us to go back into our comfort zones? I think that for me is a very interesting question around how and why are we not leveraging the technology to really move us into the insight space and less so the manual activity.
I'd like us to delve into those, and you mentioned mindset as well as skills. Which do we need to tackle first, and how do we address them adequately to ensure as well that we maintain a global standard when it comes to enhancing the human element of the starter?
So I think one of the main mindset changes that actually has to happen is, as we start moving into this industry where it's not just about the business insight, it's also about the technical skills to be able to gather the data, and then just the knowledge of where the data exists, it becomes much more of a collaborative and a team effort in the way that decisions are made. So the first mindset change that has to happen is people have to start realizing that this is more of a collaborative exercise in how you pull all of the information together, make sure that you're utilizing the different skills that are used in collecting a large and complicated data set and presenting it back, and then being able to interrogate it in the correct way, and building that team way of working rather than just relying on a single individual to take the accountability for doing the process end to end.
And I think there's quite a big cultural shift that needs to take place as well, because you can't hide the facts in data, and that's going to automatically challenge the status quo. And are organizations actually open towards those sort of new ways of thinking and challenging them in terms of their current sort of form and shape?
Exactly, because that needs to start at the top, rightly?
Yep, maybe more controversially, what we do is more important than how we do it. We need to get over ourselves, right? And it's an important point. Our relevance in the marketplace isn't judged by how we do it, but what impact we make in terms of our key KPIs, whether it's EBITDA, revenue, whether it's market share. These are the key KPIs that bother our stakeholders. So if we're spending time on the inside, just doing what we always did, we're never going to drive our relevance. And specifically in a tough fiscal environment, we've got to change. So when you think about the what versus how, a few things come to mind. We need the sponsorship to get over ourselves. We need to promote teaming within organizations, break down the silos amongst the colleagues within the organizations, and open up ourselves for partnering. Why should you as an organization do something that industry's been doing for the last 10 years at a much cheaper price point? Why can't we partner at the how level to deliver much stronger propositions to the market? So in my mind, one, it's a sponsorship. Two, it's the culture of teaming and innovation. Innovation isn't a one-day exercise, it's a commitment to a new way of working. When we start to get over ourselves, we start to see insights and patterns that we never saw before. When you bring together data sets that were never commonplace, HR, finance, operations, patterns emerge that tell us how to run the business in new ways, and we'll become a lot more agile.
I want to challenge you on that one, because even each of you here on the panel come from large organizations, structured corporate firms as well, which have processes and manners within which to do this. So if we're calling for this additional element of teamwork, different thinking, and getting over ourselves and understanding that there's a greater cause and purpose that we need to serve here, how do we change the mindsets but still maintaining the level of structure and control without closing up the society?
Well, maybe I can start. I guess we call this a multi-mode organization or a two-speed organization. Clearly, there's certain things we do as organizations, whether it be private sector, consulting groups, or whatever the entity is. But we need to be multi-speed. In one regard, we need to do what we've always done in as efficient a way as possible, using automation, using industrialization. In other regards, we need to be a lot more agile and responsive. So organizations like those represented here today, we mostly have a two-speed organization, one that allows us to be responsive. As customer needs change, we can respond very quickly, while bringing up the rear by changing slowly but surely the bigger operational engine. But being responsive to changing needs makes us relevant. In a time where our clients and our organizations have options from a competition perspective, they could easily swap overnight. So it's the ability to be responsive, to hear, to listen, and to respond that makes us relevant.
And I think the other thing that brings in a lot of people's willingness to change and to take some of those risks involved with any change is to actually create an environment for them where they can start seeing the benefits of what it is that they're doing. If you speak to a lot of people within the accounting space, they always feel that by the time they get the information, by the time it's actually made available to them on Workday 22, or perhaps even as late as Workday 30, it's too late for them to make any significant changes on what does it really mean. So if you can explain to them the benefits of saying, well, look, if you do start bringing in ways of getting that information to make it available earlier, so that you have the information when there's still time to take action that could be relevant. It's very often is received once it's just too late to make any significant change.
I'd like to add to Lee's comment, and you referred to the two-speed mode of operation. But I'm even pushing organizations further in saying you need to find mechanisms to, it's a multi-speed organization that you need to build. And your question, Gugu, around the controls and the structured nature, I think the one thing we find is in the analytics environment, it's all about that, finding that balance between being agile and being controlled. And understanding that not every requirement requires the same level of control or the same level of agility. And that really drives you to a point where you start to realize that as an organization, you need to have the ability to move across that continuum on an ongoing basis and understand the need and qualify quickly whether that specific need is about control or about agility or somewhere on that continuum, and then being able to respond accordingly. So build your systems, your processes, your technology, and your people in such a way that you can actually start to move across that continuum on a more regular basis.
Easy, though, is it to implement such a structure? And again, adapting the mindset and thinking of individuals within the organization to that level of flexibility, but understanding how to differentiate between the two. Johan?
I think it's easier than we think and harder than we think in a way. So where it works is where it encourages the natural curiosity of the people, and they get engaged in the agility side of things, and they can see the outcomes and the exciting developments coming out of that side. The problem is the majority of organizations are very fixed and controlled environments for specific reasons. I mean, you've got a lot of legislation, you've got regulation on top of that. That forces them into a very controlled mindset. But I think the moment they see the green shoots coming out of this agile environment, where all of a sudden it shows them things they didn't even think of before, they adopt a lot quicker.
I want to go ahead.
I think we always talk about the digital disruption, but up to the point that you don't start making the organization aware of that, and I think that's where analytics on the one side also comes in, is that we continuously need to challenge the status quo. So we need to start thinking more entrepreneurial, and so by creating entities within the organization that can start generating those insights, almost a fiercest type of competitor sort of questioning, it does start asking the questions to the rest of the organization. So then in terms of approaches like agile, all of those different things, you can start driving change. It's not an easy journey, but at least you just need to get people to at least see that change is coming and that they need to work towards that.
You mentioned a critical element there, which is that entrepreneurial thinking, which isn't something that many individuals are certainly blessed with. But again, coming back to the management accounting structure and even other critical and key individuals within organizations, can you actually upskill individuals to start thinking in that manner? Can you see a skills exchange as well from individuals who are entrepreneurial in their thinking in trying to address this mindset issue with those who aren't? And what about the generational and even cultural and gender influences, where for some people it's not that easy for them to be assertive and unbiased in some of their views and opinions when analyzing data?
Well,
go ahead then.
I think the same way that you've got to be working at two different speeds, you have to recognize that both types of people actually do have value within the organization. So certainly not everybody in the organization can become an entrepreneur. You do need people who are prepared to be the followers and make sure, they say if you want to start a movement, you can't underestimate the role of that first follower. So you have to have the people that are being the entrepreneurs that are driving it through, and then people that are prepared to follow them and actually see it through to the end and make sure that it gets properly embedded within your organizations. But when it comes to how do you spark and how do you make sure that the people that do have that entrepreneurial leaning can be brought to the fore, I think a lot of it is around what kind of forums do you have in your organization where people can actually speak out, perhaps outside of their standard organizational structure, so that the voices can be heard. And then how do you make people aware of the correlations that they're seeing within that data? So if you can show those correlations that can be turned into business value, and create ways of getting people to feel excited about that potential for utilizing those correlations, I think that's where you start sparking the entrepreneurial spirit and entrepreneurial thinking.
So maybe two concepts. The first concept, when you think about the way work gets done, we're moving to what we call an outcomes economy, where the focus should be on what you do versus how you do it. And a correlating trend in HR is something we call talent follows the work and work follows the talent. And that's interesting because the way we've done work could fundamentally change. Why do I need to see you to know that the work is being done? If I move from outputs to outcomes, I could be anywhere in the world. I could be in the townships, working hand in glove with an established corporate. The question is, how do we promote that way of working? And I'll go back to the point about sponsorship. If there's sponsorship to a new way of working, and we find a way to tap in to these entrepreneurs, tap into the township economy, when we have unemployment north of 26%, we're going to find a way to partner. The second question you asked was on how do we upskill? Now, what's fundamentally changed is that as accountants and scientists and applied mathematicians, we all went to university and had structured education. But today, if I told you, Google, you had to learn design thinking or learn advanced analytics, you can acquire those skills in a whole different way. You could use what we call online-based training, what we call MOOCs, massive open online courses. We can suddenly acquire these skills in your own time. Now, if you were told that your very skill set's irrelevant, and if you put in the effort to acquire new skills, what I can tell you today is that those skills are available, the knowledge is available, but you need to meet your employer halfway to acquire what you don't have to drive your own job relevance. So the onus can't always be on the employer for management accountants. What are we doing to drive our own upskilling, to drive our own relevance as we move to an insights-based management accountant?
Very true. Werner, you wanted to add?
Yeah, what's very interesting for me, and you mentioned the millennials. Now, the reality is millennials are not yet running the large corporates, and that would probably change soon. But the single biggest challenge that I find is that it's not necessarily about learning new skills, it's about unlearning old skills. Because this is a new way of work, exactly as Lee has mentioned. The world is changing around us. And the most difficult thing I certainly see is for the Generation Xers, like myself, to unlearn the things we believe is the right way of doing things. And that's often the biggest barrier to adopting these new ways of work, these new methods, new techniques, new technologies.
What about if I actually spoke in confidence of the Generation X's and said, but perhaps you've got the added advantage of further wisdom and understanding, and making reference to past events, and that might enable you to analyze the data more efficiently because of the level of experience that you have. Would that not also play an element, or does there need to be some kind of exchange here between the different generations too?
I think, if you start looking at idea creation and all of those things, I think the younger generations are absolutely exceptional when it comes to that. So many new ideas, many new thoughts and all of that. I think what we as Generation X bring is a bit of how do we actually start generating value from that. So there is, again, that element of control structure that we actually bring to it, that we can contain it and drive it through absolutely to value.
And I think it's very important as well to understand that what exactly are you automating. So you can have a fairly sophisticated analytics environment that will give you correlations across variables that you wouldn't have thought of seeing before. But I think what the Generation X's bring with the experience that they have is actually being able to understand what of these correlations are irrelevant anomalies versus what is actually causation. So what is the starting point? What is the trigger that's starting this conversation? And that also speaks to the way that we actually have to work, in that it isn't enough to say, well, it's fully automated. The same way that you can waste time by not automating functions that should be automating, you can end up making some very bad decisions if you automate a decision that should have had a human element brought into it, and some experience as far as, is that really what you would have expected the data to show you. I'm
happy for us to also draw on some of the experiences within your own organizations, especially given the reach and scale of these entities. But as you mentioned, obviously data needs to be reliable, it needs to be measured to ensure as well that we can see and pick up on the patterns that you alluded to here as well, Lee. How critical then is the consistency of the human element that's been placed to analyze this data? Johan, is that a vulnerable element where, depending on the level of staff turnover within an institution, the level of training or enhancement on this training, or restructurings that might take place, could that jeopardize the quality of the analysis of the data?
Certainly, yes. I think a lot of corporates are finding that there's very high turnover, and therefore you lose a lot of your corporate memory. Thankfully, there's lots of consulting houses. The processes are becoming a lot more similar across the industries, and the industries are converging. So it's not like any of the industries are that unique these days that the issues faced in that industry can't be solved by solutions created in other industries. But upskilling the people, I think, is a challenge, and it's one of the more difficult things because the incentive isn't clear from day one. People are used to doing their work in a certain way. Now you're trying to encourage them to look at it differently, do different things, and they can't necessarily see how that would benefit them immediately.
So again, moving to that incentive model.
Yeah.
I think if we had to put a baseline that everybody runs on the same data, same analytics tool sets, it's always going to be about the judgment, the interpretation, and then the action that's going to make it unique. And that's what's going to drive uniqueness in terms of business models and all of that. And no person is exactly the same. I think therefore as well, businesses will most probably still differentiate on how they actually use the data and drive that to outcomes. So currently, obviously, the level of adoption is going to determine who's going to lead and who's going to lag. But eventually, as this mature, it is always going to require that human element, ultimately.
I was going to make the point, Gugu, that from an analytics perspective, all industries, including analytics, is becoming commoditized. So in many cases, we now have access to what we call elastic infrastructure. All the large telcos suddenly have data centers. Suddenly, your ability to jump into the big data bandwagon, the barrier is much lower. Secondly, the questions that clients ask us as professional services organizations, whether it's churn, turnover, customer acquisition, these questions and the algorithms that underpin them are actually quite commonplace and have become industrialized. So like I mentioned earlier, there are many things that one can do to start to take the hard work out of insights. And to your point earlier, what the management accountant needs to do is at the very, very top, distilling what he takes forward into the organization. But the reality is that in the world we live in right now, there are many things that actually become automated and industrialized.
Werner, you just wanted to add a point before we go to break?
I would like to challenge the thinking, or at least present an alternative view that there's also benefit in turnover of key people and staff, because a fresh perspective often brings fresh insight. And of course that's also where while the technologies and the methods and the tools are certainly commoditized, that different perspective that you bring on what you see is often what leads to the new insight. And then lastly, for me, the most important thing is not the insight only, it's the ability to execute on that insight, which is probably the single biggest shortfall. And that's the real competitive advantage, because we often come to the same insight across different organizations. The one who executes first and executes best is probably the one that will win.
Well, we'll certainly continue on the element regarding execution, which is quite important and imperative, and of course delving into the role of management accountants within their respective institutions. We'll continue with the CGMA Dialogue series right after the break.